Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning from wherever you are. I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. I'll be your host today for this month's DevSecOps Bunch. Excited to have my friend Keith from GitHub. He's going to share some great information about developer-first security as we get towards this notion of screaming fast pipelines. So as is common in this, we're going to wait about a minute or two to make sure everybody's online before we really get steamrolling here. So I'll start a 60-second countdown clock, as it were, to allow more people to join. I'll remind you all that we'll be using the Q&A. So if you have questions as we go, feel free to do stump the speaker questions in the Q&A. And Keith and I will take those Q&A questions at the end of today's session. The chat is open as well. You can chat with each other in the background as Keith and I are talking. We may or may not see what's going on in the chat, so make sure you use the Q&A as a way to interact with Keith and myself. As I said, we'll get started in about 30 seconds here as my clock ticks down. And we look forward to today's conversation on developer-first security for screaming fast pipelines. This month's DevSecOps Bunch with our special guest from Keith Hoodlet from GitHub.
I will say I love the stump the speaker questions. It's sort of like trivia for us, Brian. You know, it's
Sure.
Most of the time we're always sharing things that we know a lot about, but when people ask us questions we don't, it's sort of like, well, my best guess is this, and hopefully we get it right. But every now and then we always need to go back and do more research.
I've been around mobile and mobile security since BlackBerry days, but there's still plenty of ways you can stump me. So it's just the nature of the beast, right? Some people are better at iOS or Android. Some people are better at certain types of coding or application types. Some people are better at certain kinds of tools. So
sure.
The technology stack we all work with today is amazingly diverse and complex compared to the days when I was one of the first developers working on that thing called Visual Basic, you might have heard of.
I used to do some stuff on Visual Basic around Battle.net in the Diablo days in the 1996-97 timeframe.
So I was one of the architects of ADO, the data library that plugged in Visual Basic. Amongst many other things in my crazy history that you can tell I've got all this gray hair. So it looks like it is time to get us started. So here we are. Welcome to April's DevSecOps Bunch. For those of you joining us, if this is your first time, this is our monthly series. Every month, I invite an expert on a topic to come join. And today we have Keith from GitHub. You'll find he's very full of knowledge and experience, having been on a fascinating journey over the last decade or two, as have I. We're really focusing today on the developer storyline, the developer-first security for screaming fast pipelines. Keith and I are both storytellers, so we're going to share stories with you as we go. As I said earlier, a reminder, the chat is open, so you can chat with each other, and there are some moderators on the chat. But to get Keith and my attention, please use the Q&A tab. We will look at all the questions at the end as part of our Q&A session at the end. We'll kind of barrel through here. During today's session, we will be polling a few times. If you could answer the polls, we appreciate that, because that way Keith and I know what kind of audience we have and make sure we steer our conversation going the right place. In addition, we are recording today's session, so you'll get a recording of the session. You also get a copy of the slides a couple of days after this event. All of the DevSecOps bunch for the last almost 2 years now, year and a half, are available online from our website as well. So we've got lots of great speakers. And coming up, we'll have more as we go through this year of 2022. So without further ado, Keith, would you like to introduce yourself and your background here for the crowd we have today?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. And so I'm a code security architect here at GitHub. What that means is I work very closely with the field security team and customers on implementing our GitHub Advanced Security tools, but specifically CodeQL is sort of it's my jam. It's what I like to play with day in and day out. Before all this, I built the DevSecOps program from the ground up at Thermo Fisher Scientific. I've been a top 100 security researcher at BugCrowd, and I've had stints at other companies such as Veracode and Rapid7 in my history. So I've had a lot of fun in this industry. Mobile hacking was never something I really got into, though, as a bug bounty hunter. It was too challenging for me, honestly.
We appreciate your expertise in joining us today. So I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. I'm a bit of a rare animal. You may or may not have ever heard of a Chief Mobility Officer and might be wondering what the heck one of those things are. And so that actually dates back to the time when I was working as a partner at BlackBerry and was really kind of inventing a whole category around mobile innovation. It's called mobile service management, about high availability mobility, right? Today, we take advantage of high availability mobility, meaning we pretty much have dial tone quality when it comes to application services. But if you think all the way back to the late 90s and the early 2000s, it wasn't the truth. Right. And so in my journey, I've worked a lot with mobile innovation teams, mobile security teams, application developers, systems operators in kind of the end-to-end spectrum. And so today I'll be sharing part of our background. And so what I'd like to do is kind of get us rolling here. I'm going to talk a little bit about NowSecure. Keith, I'll talk a little bit about GitHub. Somehow I'm betting most of you heard of GitHub. You may or may not have heard of NowSecure. So make sure you understand who we are. So NowSecure was actually born at the end of the BlackBerry era that I came from, when the iPhone and the Android devices were created. And our founder, Andrew Hu, got very interested in mobile forensics and built a mobile forensics business that became a mobile pen testing business, that became a mobile open source tooling business, that became a commercial software business over the years. And today we are a mobile first, mobile only type of business. So everything you need for mobile security, from the development through the testing and production lifecycle. We do pen testing services as well as our tooling. We'll have a look at some of that tooling today. If you all are into open source and you are on the security analysis or research side, you might be familiar with Frida and Radari, two of the top reversing and disassembly tools used in the mobile universe. We do a lot with OWASP, and we believe a lot in standards. I'll talk about that today. We helped invent the OWASP Mobile. And today, Carlos, who's one of the two spec leads for the MASVS, is part of our team in terms of driving the evolution of mobile application security standards and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit about NowSecure. Would love to have Keith in a second tell us all about the others. I forgot there was a customer slide in here. How about that for a little brain dead moment? We work with companies of all sizes and shapes. You get an organization like Uber, for example, that is mobile first and mobile only. High-tech companies like Cisco, financial services, consumer retail. Mobile affects every business. We all live on our smartphones. The average human has 40 or 50 apps on their smartphone. Every business I know is using apps, and many of them, if not most of them, are creating apps. And so today we're going to talk to the developer community, the QA and the security analyst community around secure mobile application development and delivery. And now I will introduce Keith to tell us a little bit more about GitHub, which is like the biggest repo on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it, right? Most people that work in software development in some capacity, or even in security, know what GitHub is. It's usually where they go to get their open source tools, whether it's Metasploit or working with various interesting frameworks like Vue or React, or all sorts of other interesting things. Needless to say, largest development platform on the planet. We have millions of organizations, including a number that you just showed logos for as our customers, as well as, of course, nonprofits and others such as OWASP, who hosts a bunch of stuff on GitHub. We have a lot of contributions every year and hope that you folks will either decide to have your first open source contribution this year or contribute to another project if you're continuing to do that. And then, of course, we have some of the very top open source communities out there, lots of stars all over the place. And then, of course, many, many public and private repositories. So you've probably heard of us, but if you haven't, github.com, check us out. There's a lot of cool stuff there.
There you go. There you go. And so, I first plugged into a GitHub repo many moons ago. We were actually using an internally developed source code system when I was actually at BlackBerry, which is kind of scary. But the world has evolved to standards. So we're going to open our first poll. So if the webinar moderator could help us out here in the first poll, this is just who's here today, right? So what we have found in these webinars is for Keith and I to make sure we share our stories the right way. We like to understand who's here, right? So if you can pick your role here, I realize some of you might be a hybrid role, but try to pick the one that most likely represents kind of who you are and what role you're in, and we'll leave the poll open for about 30 seconds. Typically in these webinars, we do get a mix of folks from the ops engineering side of the house all the way back in through development. Sometimes you get PMs and architects. Also get security professionals and QA folks. So we've been developing a really great audience here. We have a couple of thousand folks now who have joined us over the last year and a half, and would like to know kind of who you are. So with that, if we could share the results back so Keith and I can see what we got today.
Brian, I also want to sort of joke that I noticed there's no DevSecOps on there, but then again, I always go back to the trusty handbook, and it's just DevOps. Yeah. It's part 6. It's like, yeah, that's what I would have put.
Yeah, so that was actually intentional because we find people who will say they're in DevOps, but we don't necessarily find people say they're in DevSecOps. DevSecOps is more of a movement than a job title.
That's fair. It became my job title at Thermo Fisher, but that's totally fair.
I get it. Right. So I appreciate the humor. Definitely, you've got the reference book. I'm sorry I'm not in my home office. We could do a book show today. What's really cool, I think, about our crew today here, Keith, is we have a bunch of people from lots of different functional and skill areas, and so we'll speak to all these different areas as part of today's conversation. So let's close the poll, and we're going to have a second one here. And, today's tee-up is all about developer-first security. And so we find there's a variety of reasons that organizations are looking to, call it, shift security left, developer-enabled security, build security champions in development. There's a variety of motivating reasons. And again, for Keith and I to make sure we're telling the story the right way, we'd like to know, which of these reasons, maybe pick your top two, are you here today? And why are you considering moving in this direction? I think it's interesting for me because I've been in some of our customers where developers just naturally feel responsible for security. And I've been in fact, don't even have much of a security team. And I've been in other organizations where developers have said, oh, that's security's responsibility. They're the guys on the other floor over there. And kind of everything in the middle. And having been a developer and a security professional, kind of worn both hats. I also did ops for a little while. You don't want me running ops, by the way. From that perspective, I'm not wired for 5 nines. But running a services team really brought my eyes to the nature of what actually happens when you move from development into prod, right, and go through the cycles of updating and patching and all the rest. So. Okay, 10 seconds, and then we'll have the moderator close the poll here. So we're interested again to see why you're here, because we will make sure we answer kind of the why you're here with the right questions and answers today as well. So Earl, if you want to flip it over. And okay, so let's see. Faster, higher quality release cycles of security built in and need to enable devs to scan and fix themselves before check-in. All right, those guys are the two lead dogs. There obviously are a myriad of reasons. Would love to know what the others are. But this is really a really good start. Any comments on the results set here, Keith?
It's funny. One of the things that I'm often known for saying is security is a feature. And the best way to know is you ask someone if they have a banking app on their phone. And the next question you ask them is, as a developer, would you use that app if it had the vulnerabilities that your application has? And I love that. You get some really interesting looks. And I love the mix that we have here because, it tells me that people are interested in making security a feature of the things that they're working on, which is awesome.
I'm going to copy down your security as a feature. Let's go ahead and close the polls and we'll get rolling. So as is customary in the DevSecOps bunch here in this new year, I always open with a little bit of a story. So let's talk about speed, right? Developer first is about speed in the pipeline and many different reasons, developer productivity, faster release cycles, and all that great stuff. And I got to thinking about rockets. So let's think about, if you're on the team who's building a communication system, series of satellites, right? And if I go back to my BlackBerry days, it was all about how do we get BlackBerry to run 5 nines, high availability. And I remember how I would tell the story about, when the CEO of Morgan Stanley walks off from New York City, walks off on an airplane in Hong Kong, he can flick on his BlackBerry device, and in about 30 seconds, he starts getting email. The miracle of how that technology worked between the back end exchange system all the way through all the carrier networks and the Wi-Fi networks and everything else, and the Mobitex network landing on that device in his hand, right? We became used to that. So what we're talking about really is starting by designing a high availability, high performance system, right? So a lot of planning is going to go in up front, and when we're building our mobile applications and any other kind of systems as well. And mobile apps are just like everything else, and they're interdependent on a lot of infrastructure in order to make them work. So now we roll out the developers. They start designing and building things along the journey, and they're planning how it's going to happen. And they're working with the people in the physical world, because I'm building a physical satellite that's going to use software and carrier waves and lasers and whatever else it is to do communications, right? Going back and forth. So now we need a team that's a hybrid team that's got lots of different skills. And as they're designing the system, they're building it, right? And we're going to watch this satellite, this communication satellite, get built and tested as we go. And here we can actually see an engineer where they've got a partially built system. They're actually running tests on that as they build it through the cycle. And here the technicians making modifications as they go, right? Because they're testing and tuning as they build it, because you've got to have this high quality. And supply chain is critical, right? And so all of the source components going into building this satellite are just as important as the pieces I'm building myself or the software I'm building myself. And I have to be able to trust those components coming into it. And as we continue to build it out, we continue to test it, right? And there's a variety of developers and engineers who are building it. There's testers and quality control people here as well. So we're spending millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on the satellite. When we put it up, it's going to stay up for maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 years and need to work like almost 5 nines, right? So quality building in here is very important. Now, finally, we get to launch day. So we get ready. We launch our satellite. Having launched a few applications in my life, I know what that's like. It launches, yay, it lifts off the launch pad, and hopefully it flies into the air and goes where you want it to and doesn't blow up along the way. And eventually it deploys itself in the sky and it's up and running. And so all of the hard work, the probably millions of man hours, the massive supply chain and everything else, just to build out the physical infrastructure and your parallel path, that was all the software that got built in order to make this actually plug in and operate in the system. And so now it's in production. We continue to monitor it and continue to make enhancements. And what's really amazing about the more modern technology we're doing today, whether it's a Tesla car, a smartphone, or a satellite, is they're all software updatable. So they really are just flying computers that we can continue to manipulate by manipulating the software. Now, again, the quality and security has to be there not only through the initial build cycle, but through the life cycle of updates as well. And so the only way to make this work in the real world, my brother's in satellites, so I know a little bit about it, just to be dangerous, is every step quality matters. Because one little screw up leads to things like the booster blowing up on the Challenger, right? We don't want to have that happen in the real world. So when we think about, as I transition this story into kind of the real world, right, what are the building blocks of success as we think about mobile development, which really kind of bridges mobile app, cloud services, backend systems for most of the apps that we build these days. So working with mobile developers, we're working on building really cool and innovative mobile apps. What you can do with this thing, this brick on my desk, is really amazing. You can hail a cab, you can order tickets, you can order food on an airplane over Wi-Fi, and so on and so forth. There's many great experiences now with augmented reality that's coming in the next generation of whatever that metaverse thing is going to be. So all of these great experiences and fundamental changes in life have come through this great innovation. And if you go back to what Steve Jobs said around the iPhone, is he didn't build it until he knew he could build something with the quality of experience for the user that was intuitive for the user. Now, I'm not preferring iPhone over Android. He's entirely quotable, which is why I use him. But anyone who's building production commercial systems know that a quality experience is a critical component of what you're trying to build. That quality experience isn't just the user experience. It's also privacy and security. And we need to think about security as a feature. And the problem that we have is security is often noise in the machine. Right? So traditional, Keith and I were talking about this the other day, traditional security tools, we have tortured developers with traditional security tools that generate a ton of noise that can be confusing, and it's hard to figure out what's actually exploitable and what's really relevant and what I need to pay attention to. And so we've made it kind of difficult, even if development and security wanted to get together, because some of the tooling and approaches we use don't really work that well. And so what we really want to do is get quality at speed. We want to eliminate the noise and give that magnifying glass or that focus to the engineering team so they can do the right things throughout the process. And so Keith's going to take us through what's really going on. And Keith, the way you talked about it the other day with this fundamental change of working within the coding environment, working within the repo every day and having full understanding of the entire code tree is really amazing. So I'm going to hand it over to you and just tell me next when you want me to go.
Yeah, go right ahead. So I think the first thing is when it comes to, we can jump ahead to the next slide. First of all, pausing for a moment to let people consume this, but also thinking about the analogy that I like to use here, which is, to your point, security as a practice over the last 2 decades or so has involved security acting as ambulance drivers. Our job is to find the emergency, bring the emergency to the people who will ultimately fix it, drop it off, and drive away. And that has led to a very unfortunate practice of the fact that we try to find more emergencies. It's how we validate the expensive sort of lifestyles and salaries and all the other budgets that we acquire from companies. And in truth, that's not really the best way to help make people healthy or help make your software healthy. And what we've seen over the last 2 decades is the more code you write, the more vulnerabilities you find. And that's just human nature, right? As long as we continue to see code being developed by people and not by robots, and even then it'll probably still be imperfect, we find that you're going to have those flaws that just happen. And so on the next slide, we're talking about, well, of course, everybody says shift security left. Like you should, and it's like, yes, but like how, why? Like what does that really mean? Put security earlier? In my mind, it's no, make security another wing in the hospital. Make them specialists that, yes, they help you respond to those critical events. But I've had knee surgery back in 2020. And I'll tell you, I went and had surgery, and then I had physical therapy, and then I had a follow-up, and then I had more physical therapy, and then I had another follow-up. I saw that surgeon at least 3 times for one surgery. And that was a good thing because ultimately it has allowed me to have a much higher quality of life. They were involved in the process for not only helping me with the immediate challenge that I was encountering or experiencing, but then ensured that I could get back to a state where I'm at a good baseline, and now I have a contact point if things start to go wrong again. And so at GitHub, on the next slide, we're talking about sort of how we take that mentality of bringing security where the developers are, building it out in that sort of wing of a hospital where we are now involved in the entire process natively, right? It's that sort of you're building code and you're getting security results. And that sort of trust by design is really around the fact that we're trying to focus on the quality of what we're looking for. I can go into a lot of detail about how we distinguish between remote sources that are exploitable by outside users versus local sources. That's probably a conversation for another day, Brian, but needless to say, the real advantage is we're trying to provide developers true identifiable paths to exploitation in their code, present it to them where they're working inside of GitHub. And then on top of that, we have the open source community who's building queries, helping customers identify problems in their environment. And at the end of the day, the really nice thing is it leads to rapid remediation of findings before that code ever makes it out to production. So it's that quality piece of quality at every step. That's what we're introducing and what we're investing in. A few ways that we do that, starting with on the next slide. One of the things that people are most familiar with is Dependabot. Now, Dependabot is sort of a blunt instrument today. One of the articles that actually just came out a week ago called Dependabot Vulnerability Exposure takes this technology and goes deeper. It's brand new. It's currently on Python and soon to be released into other languages and frameworks as well. But the idea is not only are you using a vulnerable version of the code that you need to worry about, or open source project you need to worry about, but you're actually using the functionality that is vulnerable. And that's a very big distinguishing point for developers to understand, do I have to patch this right now or do I have to patch this eventually? And then, of course, beyond that, on the next slide, we're introducing, or we've had now, and we're going further in this idea of secret scanning, where you've got, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, tools and products that you're using, and you have keys and tokens associated with them. Well, with push protection, you can prevent those from ever making it into your version history, which is awesome. And it's scalable because it's one click of a button in one platform where your developers are working. But of course, you can then also find any other secrets that may have existed in your code from the past just by turning it on. And finally, the thing that I am most excited about on the final slide here is around code scanning. It's that whole concept, or to use another analogy, unlike other tools in the marketplace, some read the recipe, some eat the cake. We actually are involved in that process of reading your recipe, going through the baking process or the build process, baking the cake, trying it, and then telling you where your vulnerabilities actually exist. Maybe your 2 or 3 year old decided to jump in the kitchen and switch the salt for the sugar. We could tell you that because they were a remote source that actually made a change to your recipe without you knowing. Needless to say, there's more complexity than that. I've written about it on my blog, but it is a very neat and interesting change to the way in which people are doing static analysis that is very new in comparison to static code analysis or binary static analysis. I call it comprehensive static analysis. So that's a little bit about what we're doing to make security native and a feature of the development process. Back to you, Brian.
Well, that was great, Keith. I love your baking story, right? You know the recipe, you know how it gets baked, you bake it, and then you know how it tastes, and then you can go figure out where the problems are before you put it in the oven, hopefully. And then
Ideally.
if necessary, you can fix it before you bake the next cake. So I think your blog has a story about Ted Lasso's shortbread cookies. So if you're into
Yeah.
Ted Lasso's shortbread, have a look at Keith's blog on that point. So we've been working with organizations I've been here 5 years, for about 4 years, who pulled us into the pipeline. So we had traditionally been building tools for security teams, but what we realized was this developer first really matters. And so we partnered with GitHub late last year to bring a mobile only solution into the GitHub Actions world. And so when we think about developer first, right? If I'm a developer, me and my team are writing code every day. We're checking it in, pulling code out, building, and so on and so forth. What I want to be able to do is to build in any mobile language framework, use any kind of SDK or what have you. I need to be able to test for iOS and Android apps built in anything and not be limited to language requirements. I need to be able to run automatically. So decided, push or pull or a run or a bash, script file execution, however you want to do it. I want to be able to get those security issues into the existing repo and security scanning environment I already have, right? So if I've already got a single pane of glass where GitHub's already feeding me tickets and issues, well, I want the mobile stuff to show up in that same place, right? So under that advanced security tab, right, and show up as basically code scanning alerts. And I need to fix it fast, right? So not only does in context matter, but how do I fix it in plain language instructions? Do I get things like code examples? Do I have links to resources if I need to learn a little bit more, what have you? More often than not, the vulnerabilities or privacy issues that we find are actually related to just miscoding errors. Didn't understand this API, didn't understand how to use this library, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have a combination of code examples to fix it and links back to the original Android and iOS documentation, that certainly can help, right? And so this developer first approach builds on what GitHub's been doing by bringing mobile in as a first class citizen within that environment for literally the millions of mobile app developers. So there's a link here to our new GitHub action, but here you can see that NowSecure now plugs directly in and actually leverages the Seraph environment in here. So now I'm running within my coding environment. I'm running within the repo environment. And so here's a GitHub action that we're going to be plugging through. And so after I make a pull request and have it run an analysis, it's giving me verified vulnerabilities scored and filtered the way I want to read them. That tells me, what did I find? So insufficient input validation allows untrusted file access. Well, that's kind of yucky. Here it is. Here's a description. There's a rule associated with it. There's business impact associated with it. And I realized I didn't get the screenshot further down the page. Is the code example to go fix this, right? And so by enabling now this first-class experience within the developer world, you don't necessarily have to have a security team doing all the reviews, because the developer can test their code before they check it in, which was one of the topics we had earlier. Developers can do an entire life cycle themselves without security analysts, or they can partner with a security team. The security team can help look through the results and help them prioritize their work and coach them on skills and help them develop skills and advocate and create security champions as well. The key to this is all of this is happening inside the GitHub environment. And so in our world, the NowSecure platform has a GUI, but most of our customers just use the API integrations into tools like GitHub. And so now I'm in the GitHub environment. I don't ever really log in to NowSecure except to turn it on, configure a few user accounts, and get on, with whatever moving I want. So underneath the hood, you might wonder what's going on. And so, Keith talked about static testing earlier. And so there are a myriad of ways to test applications for those who come from that world. NowSecure is actually bringing a standards-based testing algorithm that maps against the OWASP MASVS, testing for insecure data, testing for lost data, leaked data, app store blockers, generating software bill of materials for mobile apps that often can be a mystery. And also mapping towards regulatory compliance like FISMA, FINRA, GDPR, CCPA, what have you. Within that, it's actually testing the binary. So we take the compiled binary, we analyze that. That allows us the code independence, which is why we can test any code in any language of any type. And it's bringing together a combination of static, dynamic, interactive, and API security testing, all in one thing that runs in about 15 minutes. And so by combining all those together, you get the best of the old legacy manual testing. You get automated filtering and very, very high accuracy. Our customers report less than 1% false positives in our result sets. You can dial it in and say, hey, I only want CVSS high issues, or I only want issues related to passwords or some other kinds of sensitive data, whatever your security requirements are. And you can integrate it in tools, whether it's GitHub or anything else you're wanting. And so for many organizations, we just run autonomously in the background, which is just a phenomenal way to operate. And the most ideal way, we think, to have a developer first type of environment. Now, if you really want to run fast, it's not just about tools. It's about strategy, right? So Keith talked about thinking about security as a feature. Let's think about security as a holistic concept in your pipeline. And as we look at our best in class organizations, we have, sort of that top quartile of our customers have the ability to do commit to prod in a day or less. They can do it same day. They might do it 5 days a week. And those organizations are not only taking advantage of what you're seeing here with GitHub and the NowSecure GitHub action, they're also doing a few other things. I'm going to share those few other things. The first one is actually establishing a set of standards and requirements up front. If you have development and security teams sort of running amok, many different teams, many different rules, many different kinds of applications, you have a lack of consistency. That leads to arguments, surprises. That's a vuln. No, that's not a vuln. This one I care about, that one I don't. Does the release priority trump security requirements or what have you? Early on collaboration, beginning with the end in mind, where dev, sec, and QA teams are all on the same page about what security requirements are, how they're going to be tested, how they're going to be addressed, what's the SLA for remediation, how are you going to determine what's P1, P2, P3, what you're willing to release, and what are showstoppers, and then leverage an industry standard to get you there. For a lot of organizations, they don't have a standard policy because they don't know what to put into it. So we encourage you to leverage the OWASP MA SVS as part of that. It's got different levels. So depending on the risk level of your application, you can dial in what you want. Leveraging that allows you to then begin with the end in mind and up front. The organizations who are our customers that run the fastest leverage the OWASP MA SVS standards within their own industry or related, and they establish a level of trust and SLA agreement up front to define what is security policy, what's privacy, and how is it going to be handled by all the stakeholders. So that's a big gainer. The second big gainer is the training side of the house. We're not originally a training company. And as we worked with organizations, what we discovered in our automated testing and in our manual pen testing is most of the time the developers didn't know how to do it the right way. They weren't trained. You don't go to developer school get a master's in writing secure code. It just doesn't work that way, right? So how do we make sure that developers and sometimes QA teams now who are taking on a myriad of test automation capabilities or requirements that include both functional and the security side of the house, how do we help all of them make sure they understand what actually matters when it comes to a mobile security world? And so in that training process, again, if you can increase the knowledge set of both the developers and the testing teams, that means you're going to write more secure code. The cheapest way to release an app and the fastest way to release an app is to never write a bug in the first place. Bugs cost money per the chart Keith had earlier. And so a little bit of education we found goes a long way. And so as part of that strategy, NowSecure has actually made education free. So NowSecure Academy is for anyone writing or testing mobile apps that want to learn it. They can go sign up and get trained. And what we found again is our top performers are all ones who run through regular training cycles to make sure the skill sets are there. Now, we have the whole automated testing cycle that we looked at before, so I'm jumping over that part. We're assuming using GitHub and the NowSecure action. The other thing is to think about some high-risk applications. You can't automate it all, right? And as much as Keith and I wish we could and our researchers wish we could, you can't, right? So how are you going to automate the pen test of a satellite? I don't exactly know how to do all of that. I can do a lot of that, but I can't do all of that.
You're going to just make it open to the internet. That's how you pen test the satellite.
Yeah, exactly. And so the reality is there's still places where you need some human skill and expertise. So if you can automate 80 to 90% of all the testing every day as the code is built, then you only need to test a little bit at the end and have that little bit be the complicated parts, whether it's an IoT thing or maybe it's a complex scenario. Maybe you have very complex authentication technology. You disable it for automated testing, but then at pre-release testing, you do authentication testing, multi-factor biometric, maybe use CAT cards or whatever else, right? Those are the kinds of things where you bring in the human to solve the hard problems where automation can't. But in a world where you can automate 80% and only for the highest risk or complex acts, you do the 20%, that again is getting you that speed and velocity in the pipeline. The last thing is really monitoring prod, right? And so when we think about what happens when you push that app into production, well, interesting things can happen. What happens if a third-party dependency breaks that's a service that your app talks to? That could actually create a vulnerability of your app in prod. You didn't push a new build, but something you're talking to broke, right? So you can actually configure to monitor your own apps in production to make sure any dependencies didn't change on you that possibly broke something. Now, in the same way you can do that for the apps you build, you should think about doing that for the apps you use. So maybe your organization is using like SAP or Oracle or Microsoft Office or Slack, right? All of those applications are commercial apps you're bringing into business, but you probably ought to make sure they're secure as well, especially if they've got your satellite designs and manufacturing process in them somewhere. You don't want the bad people, stealing that or malicious people changing it in a way that's nefarious. And so monitoring in production is just as important as monitoring the cycle. And so we find that the fastest organizations with the fastest rockets that can launch rockets the soonest to get their satellites into space do these things. They establish policy using standards. They do training and continuous training. They do automated testing in the tool chain. They use embedded developer remediation to speed repair. They do periodic pen testing when they need to, but not when they don't. And they monitor in production. And that's how you get speed and velocity. And if we think about the apps we're building are like the satellites and communication systems we're launching, they need to be high reliability, high quality, high availability, and run for the long haul. We can do this very cost effectively and efficiently today. And so NowSecure brings a full portfolio. Everything I just described is actually what NowSecure brings to the table. You can learn more by talking to us after this webinar. We wanted to mainly share with you the best practices that GitHub and NowSecure have learned in the market space and give you kind of some insights on where we're taking our offerings and our technology capabilities so you can become smarter and more effective at what you're doing. So when you think about together, Keith, you want to get started on the left-hand side. How do we bring these together for the folks?
Yeah, honestly, I think that the best part is you're bringing all of the NowSecure information into the rest of the developer workflows that we are bringing it into, right? It's you can, of course, sort by tools or filter accordingly. But again, you're getting all of the goodness of NowSecure in with all of the goodness that we are already providing to you. So now you're taking that sort of capability, functionality, that thought process, and extending beyond just sort of the out-of-the-box stuff that we're seeing today with GitHub, especially when it comes to open source packages. That detection and prevention is super, super valuable, especially when you get that action kicking off to say, hey, do we have any NowSecure findings before we actually merge this pull request? And then, of course, getting that high-quality information right where the developer is working in a way that they understand, so that, yeah, by the way, you're stopping those things from launching so that you now have a chance to fix them, and you're not, as a security team, scrambling on a Friday afternoon before some team decides to go to production with a vulnerability because I never actually got to that branch of code anyway, which is awesome.
Exactly. And so test what matters and do it in a way that you're feeding the results into the workflows of the team, right? And that allows the developers to be more productive, whether they're testing before they do the commit and submit their code all the way through every step in the life cycle. And again, that feeding the result set back into the existing workflows in the context of everything else. One of the things we didn't mention before is the reality is every mobile app's using code written somewhere else. So while we're testing the mobile app, you probably also have some code that might live in the cloud or live on your back end that actually makes up the entire value chain of the app. And so while you're using, the native scanning, for example, from GitHub of scanning your Python or your Java or what have you that's maybe on the server or the cloud, we're scanning the front end piece. Now in a single pane of glass, you're getting the entire end-to-end view of where your vulnerabilities and issues might exist. And so that's super powerful for organizations. So do the right planning in the process, bring together an effective supply chain and monitor your supply chain, have the right teamwork, use integrated continuous security, and you too can deliver high quality satellites and mobile applications into the marketplace. So our last poll of the day is, we talked about a number of things today, and we'd like to know what you're sort of most interested in here. So from the poll, this is kind of like, where are you going to go next? What would you like to investigate further? This helps us kind of understand if we hit the mark fully or not. I just realized that the last update on poll 3 didn't make it into the poll, so I apologize, Keith. But for the poll here, if you pick the ones you think you want to investigate further, pick 2 of them maybe that are the things most interesting to you. We're very interested in that. We want to make sure we're kind of hitting the mark with the guidance and content that we're sharing here. So this helps us validate it as well. And so with that, if you want to go ahead and share the results there. All right, everybody's digging into gas. Good for you. Good, right? I mean, it only makes sense. I think if you go back to, the GitHub knows the recipe, GitHub helps you bake it, it tastes it, it helps you tune it, right? That's really the most ideal way to do this. And some light bulbs have gone off for me in this journey working with the gas team since late last year. And that is, GitHub actually has the deepest insights into what you're building, all the dependencies, all the code you're writing, the cadence, the operational flows, and everything else. And so being able to see that code and see and understand that process, they really can guide you through building security in. And while security is a feature, what we really want is security and privacy by design, but not just by design, by how we build it, right? Mm-hmm. So security then becomes the core features for success. So thank you for your votes on that. And yes, production monitoring. I saw that last one. That's one of my pet peeves is production monitoring.
Oh yeah, how do you know that something's broken unless you're monitoring production? I always used to think about
production to know if it breaks. Absolutely.
For me, it was always
about P&G here, Keith.
Yeah. So real quick, I just want to say, GitHub Enterprise customer that we work with, great partner, right? And the real plan is, again, just going back to basics, especially as a security organization. One of the things that is sort of overlooked in software or application security is asset management. And one of the best ways to do that in terms of the code that you're building, your first party code, is put it into a version control system, centralize it, and then plug security into that process. And P&G has done a wonderful job of sort of getting that collaboration across their organization, rolling out actions like things like NowSecure or things like you see with GitHub Advanced Security to then go ahead and automate all of that goodness in the platform that the developers are working. And really the intention here is make development fast, easy, and secure, which is ultimately what companies like P&G are doing today to actually help their developers do good work and deliver great products to their customers.
I think P&G is a great example, and I'd like to. I think you have some resources to share with the folks where they might want to go to learn more.
Sure, just high level again. A lot of these are sort of just links themselves. The documentation is great, but most people don't read it, which is sort of unfortunate. I will tell you virtually all of the answers that I've ever found and any of the challenges that I've run into when it comes to GitHub is in the docs. Definitely check it out. I will also add labs.github.com or lab.github.com is an often unknown but phenomenal tool when it comes to leveraging the platform, whether open source, private repositories, organization, or otherwise. Especially if you're interested in doing things with CodeQL and code scanning, just look up CodeQL, one word, and you will get 2 different training courses available. One is on C or C++ called the U-Boot Challenge. The other is on JavaScript and jQuery. Both are great and really easy sort of walkthroughs. You don't need to pay anything to use them. Those are just freely available. Log into your GitHub account and make use of it. The marketplace, I always like to point people back to that. That is where most people would go and search for the NowSecure action in the workflow, or other native apps and functionalities and integrations. So definitely recommend checking it out because there's a lot of companies and organizations plugging into GitHub to leverage all the goodness that we bring. Of course, if you need help, people usually want to know where to go, help@github.com, really easy.
Yeah, I think I want to compliment you on the marketplace. A lot of our security partners are popping up or there now too. So from a GitHub Actions perspective, so Contrast Security, who many of you have seen on this series, NTT White Hat Security as well, ThreadFix and others, all working within the ecosystem to try to make it easier for developers to get their job done fast, right? So there's lots of examples I could use. I think for this conversation, I'll use Caribou Coffee. Caribou Coffee is your classic. If you know Starbucks, Caribou is like a little Starbucks. And if you think about kind of the coffee world, there's the big machine companies like a Starbucks, Peet's and others, very large national. They have first-class mobile experiences. I think I heard in the last Starbucks earnings announcement that something like 29% of all Starbucks transactions start and end on a mobile device. And something like 50% start on a mobile device, but they may finish in the store. And so they made a huge investment and reaped a lot of rewards. Caribou Coffee is different. It was a coffee house. People came to have coffee and sit there and drink or talk with friends or whatever else. When COVID hit, they weren't ready for a suddenly remote mobile ordering world. And so they had to move quickly to innovate and figure out how to take their simple find my local Caribou, exchange what music's playing today or whatever else into I want to buy coffee and have it delivered. I want to buy coffee and pick it up curbside. And they realized that as they moved into the transaction world, the need to protect PII and secure transactions and everything else was very important. They had a very slow development cycle. So we were able to help them move from a quarterly cycle to a monthly cycle now to, I think they're on a sprint 2-week cycle now to continually driving innovation. They've actually won some awards with their app, and it was all by integrating into the developer workflows. It was all by speeding security in through the process. And they've been able to be more innovative. They not only weathered the storm, but the revenues are overall up at Caribou. And now as people are going back to Caribou, they've learned they can shop on their phone and then show up and the coffee's poured in a nice glass bowl. They have these giant coffee bowls, you can sit and drink out of, like the 16-ounce giant wide mouth coffee cups and stuff. So it's really been a great experience with them. And we'd like to bring that to you as well. So a couple of links for you. So we do have the link to the GitHub action, the NowSecure GitHub action in the marketplace. You can go download it for free right now. If you're a NowSecure customer, it'll work immediately. It's included in your NowSecure license. If you're not a NowSecure customer, ping us. We can do a demo account so that you can get started using it a little bit and turn you into a customer. I mentioned the free training before. So NowSecure Academy is live. We've got over 1,000 people in it taking live training, recorded training, but learning as it were live. And then if you're building out your full mobile tool chain, we actually have a guide on the 10 components of security and building out your tool chain. And I covered 5 of them today, for example, as part of the story. And that kind of helps you assemble the best of breed process for you to ultimately use. So we're going to shift into Q&A. I would encourage you to use the Q&A tab in order to ask us questions. I'm going to open the Q&A tab here in my background so I can see it. So in terms of, there's a question here, does NowSecure GitHub Action work with GitHub Enterprise on-prem? So you can do GitHub Actions from the Enterprise on-prem. I believe most of our software testing capabilities will work in that world. NowSecure is in the cloud. So basically what's going to happen is the test itself is going to move into the cloud and the results are going to come back down to you. So that's effectively, I believe, how it works in that type of configuration. We can also
firewalling is going to be the big one. DNS and firewalling is going to be the things that you need to always check for in that world.
Exactly. And we have a lot of customers in the same scenario that use hybrid environments. They also have multi-cloud environments. You just have to manage the network communications parts of this in order to make it work effectively. There's lots of other local tools people use. You may also, your mobile app may be accessing resources behind your firewall that you maybe have to expose in order to allow that, the mapping to allow the traffic through, right? Whitelist a particular IP address or tunnel some traffic, depending on kind of what you're doing. That's kind of in the weeds there. So here's a question for me at NowSecure. So what languages can you test? So I'm going to go ahead and sort of say, you name it. If you can compile it and run it on an iOS device or run it on an Android device, we can test it. Now you might be thinking, well, how do you do that? Because like the static source code tools I know have to know what language you're in. Well, what we're actually doing is we're decompiling the binary to run binary static analysis. And so that intermediate level language we get to gives us great visibility and low false positives. But then we're actually installing the app on a real mobile device run in one of our device rig farms. And the dynamic and interactive testing are going to run while it's actually living or hosted on that mobile device. When it's done, it's going to kick the results back into your GitHub instance. And so the function of doing that means that as long as it runs on iOS or Android, we can test it. Now, you may have to tune the app to work. So for example, you need to give us the ability to get past authentication, whatever that means, right? Either give us authentication tokens and let us use them, or if you have like biometric authentication, there's nothing automated in the world that can test biometric authentication, so you need to disable that. That's the practical reality, whether you're doing UX testing or security testing. But what's great about this process is that we tend to find that 60 to 70% of the actual vulnerabilities in the real world are found through dynamic and interactive security testing, not static. People are doing a pretty good job at static testing, right? The reality is that a lot of the issues and vulnerabilities we find in mobile applications are related to data leakage in storage and data leakage over the air. The only way you really find those effectively, at least in the mobile world, is to actually run the app in the real world. Then you can forensically analyze the traffic going over the air and the data being stored on the device, even in temporary files, log files, or what have you. And that's often where we find issues as well. Keith, I got one for you here real quick. So you talked about the evolution of Dependabot. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so I think the big one and the whole vulnerability exposure capability. So I've been here only since November of last year, and so I had the great opportunity to live through both Log4j and Spring having major zero-day vulnerabilities sort of released publicly on them. And of course, everybody under the sun, open source projects, customers, and otherwise, were asking, am I vulnerable? And if so, where? And Dependabot, as it exists today, only looks at your main branch, and it only tells you based on any sort of properties files that you might have, or POM XML files, manifest files. Do I have a version that's vulnerable? And that's it. Blunt instrument, right? Can't tell you if you're using the vulnerable code. Can't tell you where you're using it. Just that you have this thing that you're importing. You might not even be using it at all. You just still have a legacy import somewhere out there. And some of the stuff that's coming with vulnerability exposure is sort of leveraging the abstract syntax tree linting and basically saying, not only do you have this version of the import that's now vulnerable, but based on some of the cool stuff we're doing under the hood with code scanning and some of the capabilities there, we can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that you're actually using the functionality that's vulnerable, which now allows you to not only have high fidelity signal of, do I actually have this thing in my code, but am I actually using it? Which again is sort of the holy grail of security tool sets, which is not only as a developer do I understand that I have a problem, but I know where the problem is and what's causing that problem. So I understand now the path to fix that problem. That's really what we're heading toward with that.
And then that looks like it for our Q&A. I'll leave it open for 1 second. People can grab the Q&A tab, ask us one more question if you like. Again, I will reiterate that we will be distributing the slides and the recording here in the next couple of days. So if you attended live, you'll get it a few days after. If you watch the replay, you already know it's out there. This will include links to the resources you saw today. We do encourage you, if you're not using GitHub Advanced Security, you really ought to turn it on. You really should. I mean, it's just like GitHub has 70-some million users around the world using it for the repo. Turning on gas just makes a lot of sense. It's the most integrated security capability you're going to get in a GitHub environment, period. No third party can do what GitHub can do under the hood. And then take advantage of the advanced security plugins with all the GitHub actions now in this ecosystem of, I think there's like 50 or 100 of us now, who are all providing additional levels of security testing and data flow and analysis and everything else to make you more productive from that perspective. And so with that, Keith, any final words for our crowd here?
No, other than remember to git commit and stay classy.
Oh, there you go. You need a t-shirt. You got a t-shirt like that. A sticker like that. So again, I'm Brian Reed. I want to thank you for participating today. We'll be back next month with the next DevSecOps bunch in our monthly series. And have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.